Of Australia's tourism lobby group called the Tourism and Transport Forum. I also, for my sins, chair the UNWTO's Business Council, the private sector arm of the WTO, and I'm delighted to be moderating today's session. We have five much more eminent people than I sitting on the panel. We're going to talk to and talk with, and we have Oliver over there taking all the notes to keep us honest and make sure that what we talk about gets reported appropriately back to the plenary session tomorrow. They gave me a bit of a tight brief, which was, we'll have had big plenary sessions this morning, a lot of people talking from the stage, and we're going to try and flip that around to get as much of an interactive session as we can today. To that end, of our distinguished speakers, none of them are going to make a speech to kick off with. We're just going straight into probably a question for each of them, and then try and get a discussion going. I've been given a couple of rules we're going to try and stick to, so I was made to frame the discussion. Firstly, number one point has to be interactive, so as many as we can, as many people speaking from the floor as we can get through in the session. Please, that will only happen if we don't make a keynote address every time you ask a question. We'll get as many short questions, short answers, and get through as much as we can. I'd say the Gettysburg Address, but I think that was only 200 words. It's got a bad rap, Lincoln's great speech. Collaborative. Concept of what we in the room can do to go forward as one. Is there a central issue? To that, we decided I'll come back to it, but we might drop one scenario on the table that we can talk about. Concept of long-haul aviation and taxes and how there's going to impact on particularly some of the island nations in the Pacific and Indian Ocean. And it might be the sort of topic with both some Europeans, North Americans and Pacific Asia people in the room we can talk about. And lastly, some actionable areas, things that people are actually doing themselves, a bit of swapping of notes and peer-to-peer learning, so we can take back as destination managers or as others in the industry what we can take out of this, of what other people are doing, that we either learn from their mistakes, follow their example, inspired by them, whatever, that sparks our imagination. There's a couple, and that flows from that, a couple of specific questions already gone through. You know, what actions can individuals take away? We hope we can provide some of that. What are the key collaborative actions to emerge from the session? I foreshadowed one of those. And what support would organisations need to facilitate these actions? What can groups like PARTA or my own or WTO and others do to help make those actions reality? To guide that discussion today, so we have five eminent people in the session on destinations. In no particular order other than what's written on my paper. Renton, you might have seen Renton this morning, the Supremo of Sri Lankan tourism, Mr. Earthlang, who was, Renton and I had the pleasure of speaking together on the panel in Davos last year, and he certainly made a great impression at that forum, and again today with the imagination that's coming through from that. To Sanjay, and I'm sure most people have seen that because I'm not going to read everybody's programs for them because they've presented, but Sanjay from the Indian government, the Additional Director General Ministry of Tourism in the Government of India, who has a long distinguished background in public policy and the ways in which governments, and I think it's important too, a lot of the public policy debate on climate change is usually done by and about major Western nations, and it's important that that debate not just be shanghaied by people in Sydney, Copenhagen, Paris and Washington, but where the real challenges are in other parts of the developing and developed world. David Mazzatelli, old mate of mine from Australia, the architect of the government's white paper in Australia, who is wearing a number of hats, but also the previous chairman of ATEC, the Inbound Tourism Representative Group in Australia, sits on the board of Tourism Western Australia, so has his own destination regional issues, a long history as a policy advocate in this industry. The man whose own public-private partnership came from being the bureaucrat, went out to be the lobbyist, so has seen both sides of the public policy debate. Michelle McKenzie from the Canadian Tourism Commission, the boss thereof, our great northern neighbours, a country very similar to Australia. Lots of land, not so many people. We have challenges and opportunities, resource-rich Western nation with small populations. I won't embarrass her too much. She's in a situation I used to be like as an advocate on the circuit when you had a government who wasn't that excited about climate change. We changed our government in November. They went and signed the protocol, the Kyoto Protocol, one day later. Michelle's in a country who did sign the protocol, but government changed probably the challenges of how an industry and a resource-rich country manages a tourism image when the image isn't as forthcoming from its national government at the moment. I'm sure as a great lobbyist she'll change their view. And lastly, Wally Stone, Chairman of Tourism New Zealand. As he said, he's already spoken about the challenges of how pure are you, how pure can you be when you tell the world you're very pure. There's probably, in my perspective, no country on earth that has better described their nation's tourism product, and in fact their nation, in one slogan and one logo and one campaign in recent years, the 100% Pure New Zealand, pure brilliance as a marketing campaign. Again, the challenge is now living up to a reputation that has been put out there. It's a challenge to go with it. So it's an eminent group of people. I'm going to drop a question to each of them first, and then we're going to really throw it open. There's plenty of microphones in the room if we need them, and try and get the discussion going. Let me start with Wally. As I said, you discussed it a little bit earlier, the concept of being pure, being out there. Other countries around the world, Australia certainly has suffered in recent times. You're a long-haul destination, you're a long way from anywhere with a pure, clean reputation. Do your customers, are you afraid your customers sitting in Northern Europe, North America or Northern Asia will think that hopping in a plane and flying all the way to New Zealand actually is in conflict with the image you're selling to them?
Our research shows us currently that it's not an impediment. Currently people are thinking of other ways where they can offset their carbon costs of coming to New Zealand. But what we do know is the trend is moving in such a way that we think it will be a bigger and more important issue in the future. So we have a window of opportunity now. The challenge for us is to get ahead of the game and demonstrate and give potential visitors to our country the confidence that we're doing everything we can to be 100% pure. So that's our challenge right now.
So you're saying that the gut feeling is that people might worry about it, but I think Australia's had similar research. It's not yet showing up in people having the flight guilt, the guilt
Absolutely.
miles. They're still coming.
I mean, travel has become an important driver for a lot of people, so they're still going to travel. The question is that as the conversation over carbon footprint grows and grows, as we continue to see some of the devastation around the planet, I think people's consciousness will mature to a point where will truly affect their decision making. So you always have the early adapters. So there is a segment of the market that thinks that way right now, but that is not the majority of the market. My view, though, is it's only a matter of time before that becomes more standard. And so the challenge for us is not to respond to it at that stage, is to get ahead of it now. And can I just say another point? Another point is that for us as a country, we truly see this as a part of our competitive advantage. That if we get it right, then in terms of our business model, this should be good business for both the industry and the country. The second thing is 70% of New Zealanders rate lifestyle as one of the big positives of being a Kiwi or being a New Zealander. Lifestyle relates to the environment, the landscape, etc., etc. So what you're actually seeing is an alignment of win-wins. You're seeing a win where most New Zealanders want to keep New Zealand 100% pure. And so we start from that base. The next thing we see is that operators are beginning to buy in and showing unbelievable innovation and leadership. And they've been doing that for a number of years, even before it became popular. But they're now building it into their business models, and they believe that organisations like Tourism New Zealand are starting to turn it into a competitive advantage for them. And thirdly, we see overseas visitors that are coming to New Zealand actually want to live the promise. You know, that's exactly what they want to experience. So for us, it's actually quite logical. You know, there is a clear logic of lining up those things together.
Well, what you showed, I think, is an important point of having government and industry both sign on to the project. And you're now managing the concept of living up to the brand. Renton, you're wanting to develop the brand. So you're a little bit in chronologically timeline behind where New Zealand's already at. They're out there with the brand. You're boldly following, going with your own style. How do you make sure that when you put the brand out there, and what you may learn from New Zealand or others, that you get a sign-on by both government and the private sector? Because I suppose in Waller's experience, your brand's only as strong as the weakest link there in it. Now, we all know the example of the Anita Roddick in the body shop, and you're way out there, you do one thing wrong and the bar's set higher for you. It's a bold experiment you're going down. Is everybody at home signed on, as Wally said? Do the people, the operators and the government all have the same vision that you're articulating?
The answer is no. Not yet. Actually, we realized some time ago, I mean, we've had an environment movement in Sri Lanka dating back to the 60s. We've done a lot in that area. We've had NGOs and even government. We have 74 environment laws in our country. Yet we have pollution, we have deforestation, we have all of that. But to our advantage, we also have, as I mentioned in the morning, a 47% green cover and a 30% forest cover still, and a virgin rainforest, which is Singaraja, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Now all of this added together for tourism. We wanted to take leadership in order to get even our government, but I mean, of course, the government had signed we were one of the first batch that signed the Kyoto Protocol. Now, it's not like in the US where the Californian governor is doing a lot more than the federal government does, in terms of looking at the issue of climate change. Now, in our country as well, we needed to have the leadership given so that you could, provide a canopy or a driving force in order to get everyone else interested. That's why you got to somewhat hype it up as well. And I'm thankful to Jeff again, I must say this. When we discussed this sometime last year, August, I think, and when I mentioned that, we want this big idea, to come out, and then sort of he helped me hype it up further. And he said, don't limit it to Sri Lanka. Let's do something that can have the whole global community, and you can, we could be the pioneers in that. And that's exactly what we did. And we did it at the right time. We had the opportunity in Davos after the World Tourism Day, which was held in Sri Lanka, the celebrations on a different theme though. And I think what we are really trying to do, and right now, as I mentioned in the morning, even I wouldn't be here talking to you today if we did not have this concept. I wouldn't be serving on the National Committee on Climate Change, representing tourism, if we had not come up with this idea. So concepts and big ideas have a way of driving others, rallying people around, and that's exactly what we're trying to do.
From a Sydney perspective too, we're very proud of kicking off the concept of Earth Hour in Sydney, which is starting to take off around the world. 1 hour once a year. It's not too much to ask for, but it's being in Dubai last week, and to see the huge Earth Hour poster did get some pride. I mentioned before about often the climate change debate is categorised by what whole large Western nations are doing, or particularly what a big business response is. David, a lot of your experience has been also recognising that good 70-80% of our industry and almost every global tourism industry is of a small business nature. They're not behemoth multinational corporations. From that background, that experience, how do you think we get the sign-on by the smaller operators who can't simply employ global experts, who can't simply do a program with global suppliers like BIC or buy half of Amazonia that Marriott's very commendably doing? How do we bring it down to an operator level?
Well, it's a good question, Chris. I think I'm essentially an optimist on this. The tourism export sector is a very, very resilient sector. And it has confronted significant issues in the past which it's been able to respond to. The small, medium-sized operators in Australia are probably 93% of the total industry structure. And it is necessary for us to find ways to ensure that the small, medium-sized enterprises are able to respond. But it is also interesting because they are responding. We're seeing with the presentations this morning the way in which the industry, the enterprises that in that industry are finding their way through, they are innovating, and they are developing their own systems and their own modes of adjustment. However, I think many of the small enterprises do need to have a framework in which they can operate. And it's a framework that will enable them to project their environmental responsibility to the consumer markets that is recognised by those consumer markets. And I take the point that Green Globe, for example, which is a sponsor of this conference, provides such a framework for measuring, for benchmarking, for managing, for certification, and indeed for independent verification. And it's that independence of the verification of the particular individual company's environmental performance that provides the integrity to the system and provides the assurance for the consumer that when they buy a product such as a Green Globe product, that they can be certain that it is a serious green product, it's not greenwash. So access to that particular program is not all that expensive for a small and medium-sized enterprise. It is available to them. It is web-enabled. It is not as resource-intensive as one might think so. And I think that the rollout of that type of a system will be a further demonstration of the capacity of the industry to be able to innovate its way out of this problem.
Go ahead. So I'm going to come back to in a moment. Rob Jason, who's with us from Tourism Tropical North Queensland. I know, I'll come back to you, but I know we're talking about a collaborative scheme in one little destination, which might be an example for others to use that you put very successfully up in the Tropical North. Sanjay, as I mentioned before, a lot of the debate has been framed around what does the US, Australia, European countries and others do about climate change. Somebody raised the question before of developing nations. We're saying before you get to sharing all the material spoils that we've got, we're asking you to stop doing it because it's hurting everybody else. From a Government of India perspective, have you taken the global approach? Is it an operator-led process coming up? Is it a government imposition down, or is it a good partnership at the moment?
Yeah, before I respond to this, I would like to comment on the inaugural session. Somehow it was quite a motivating session. Some of the impression was that by and large the carbon footprint problem is taken care of. I think it's not so easy, because when we were saying by what day we can say you are carbon free, it's a more complex problem. And when we look at it from the government point of view, it's much more complex. Now coming on to the overall scenario, in fact, he has just mentioned that the whole process started at Davos, and at Cartagena at the UN WTO General Assembly, resolution was passed where all the aspects were taken into care. It was what the developed countries are doing, what the developing countries are doing, and there was a unanimity on this, that all of us have to work together. The problem, as has been said in Dr. Pachauri's lecture, was very, very grave. It's very critical. If it passes 2%, it becomes very, very critical. So all of us have to play together, and my only suggestion is, if we go into the ultimate, that means by 2010 or 2011, as has been said, we'll be in a position to overcome the problem, we may tend to get misled. The main thing which India has taken was that we recently had a conference on Kerala about responsible tourism, taking into every bit and pieces what should be done. The first and the foremost was water shortage, which was taken into account. It has been mentioned by Marriott Group of Hotels that they are recycling water. That has become one of the major things. The other thing is the energy conservation. For all developing countries, energy, they don't consume much of energy. But even then, they are talking in terms of biomass, they are talking of renewable energy and other factors. It's not that they don't have to contribute. Everyone has to become conscious, and education, awareness, more than education, awareness is the main thing which has to be taken into account. But what has to be kept in mind is that when we are looking at carbon footprints or long-haul destination, we also have to look into this factor that all those people, all those countries where tourism has not come up, who have not derived the full benefit, should also derive that benefit. And it has to be dovetailed into it. So that is the reason I'm saying it's much more complex. The third feature which has been talked about a lot is airlines. Now, most of the developing countries are catching up. They are building their new airports, trying to cut down on the hovering time, trying to cut down on the parking time. That's a major step. One feature which I'm quite surprised has not been touched in the inaugural session was the role of methane. More scientific, CH4. Now, as per the findings, the role of methane as compared to carbon dioxide is 21 times more than carbon dioxide. Now, if we go into that, if we look into carbon offset through fossil fuel and work on methane, maybe the ends are faster. But what I'm trying to emphasize is we all have to work together with a common mission. But let me repeat this thing, we don't have to run. We have to go in steps.
Yep.
If we are talking in terms of 2009, for a private enterprise is okay. But for a government, if we are saying no carbon footprint by 2009, then my simple question is, why have we gathered here? Why has the Time magazine come out with a full caption of climate change? Why are everyone talking about climate change? It's not so easy. Go in phases, maybe in small steps, through concrete institutional mechanism. Try and make people literate, try and put the awareness, try and talk about each and every minor point that is affecting climate change. And then whatever we would get would be sustainable, would be responsible, would be what we are looking for. This is what
Thank you. Michelle, lastly, I think climate change and popular culture was largely kicked off the debate when Al Gore went to market with his movie and he reinvented himself from dud vice president to exciting global climate pop star. The downside of that popular culture was the movie spoke to the entire world about there being two nations who hadn't signed Kyoto, America and Australia, which didn't do much for our reputation around the world, and I think Australian tourism marketers had to put up with that. It's a different case in Canada, a country that's seen to be very green traditionally, one of the the Western countries that's most embraced. Maybe by sitting next to the US for so long, it always looked so New Zealand looked good compared to Australia, Canada looked very good compared to the US as well. There's a slightly different environment now, and I don't expect you to come quite into too much government policy as the government, but is it a challenge for you as a destination now if you think that some of the market believes the government isn't as progressive on climate change? How does the national tourism industry get ahead of that?
Well, that's a good question. It's probably more of a challenge for me in terms of working for the Canadian Tourism Commission, because we're a company that's owned by the Government of Canada as a Crown Corporation. Of course, we work very closely with the industry. So that creates kind of messaging challenges. But for sure, the world sees Canada as a vast, open, natural country. And in fact, that's a big part of our tourism image, and a big part of the image that we try and leverage when we're trying to attract visitors. So what we have found, which is working very well, is that the industry in Canada and other levels of government, in fact, are taking a lot of leadership around wanting to promote sustainability. And Randy Williams is here from the Tourism Industry Association of Canada, and they've put together a program which we supported, which is basically a toolkit for the small businesses in Canada, because of course we're like Australia, where most of our industry is made up of very small businesses, even micro businesses, and they're finding that they're very anxious to take a lot of leadership around how they can serve the needs of our customers. We don't have the same challenge that Australia has. Not every one coming from out of our country is a long-haul customer. So, in fact, that's made us perhaps a little bit lazy over the years, is that many of our travelers traditionally have driven across the Canada-US border, and that the situation on all of the US borders now, in terms of the perception that they're harder to cross, that's been a big impact to us in terms of how we grow. So we are paying a lot more attention to long-haul markets and long-haul travel. So climate change and the perception of our customers relative to air travel is a big obsession that we have from a marketing opportunity point of view. Like others here, we've been polling the markets. Maybe that's an opportunity for collaboration. Sounds like we're making a lot of researchers very rich, doing the same research, probably in the same markets, telling us the same thing, which is that our customers care about this. They care about it more in some markets than others. But so far, it has not translated to a lot of change in behavior. But we believe that will come. As my colleague here from New Zealand said, we believe that that's in front of us. And And it bodes, to us, it bodes well if we get out ahead of that and anticipate where our customers are going to go. One of the marketing strategies that we've been pursuing quite aggressively in Canada over the last couple of years is understanding a lot more about the social values of our potential customers. And so we know that there are certain segments of customers out there that travel who that don't care so much about climate change. We also know that they are not Canada's customer. We know that that our customers, in terms of their social values, do care a lot about this, and we think it's just a matter of time before that caring translates into their consumer behavior. So it's something that we're working very closely with our industry. There's been a lot of leadership. I mentioned about TIAC's leadership around working with the small business. We've also got big business in Canada working on that, and the province where I'm home based in British Columbia has taken a very bold step as a provincial government of setting very aggressive targets for sustainable tourism and for a sustainable economy, in fact, and has the government in recent times has announced it's setting up its own offsetting program so that offsets in BC will be reinvested in BC, in British Columbia as well. So that I also believe is a bit of a trend, is people trying to understand how offsetting can make more of a direct impact on the tourism experience that they're presenting. And certainly that's the trend that I'm seeing in Canada.
They've always been good greeny lefties in BC.
That plus, we're there's that. But we're looking forward to hosting the Olympics in 2010. And we have put a stake in the ground on the presentation of the Olympics that they will be the most sustainable games ever. And we're setting a new bar there, and we think that we're setting it quite high, and we are intending to reach it.
Canada has the other climatic impact of climate change. It's not island nations sinking under seawater or drought taking hand. It's the end of ski season, the shortening of ski season. Look,
let me just add one more thing to that, because you just brought my mind to kind of the north. The unlikely interpreters of climate change now in Canada are people who run polar bear tours. There's such a demand for people to come and see polar bears in northern Canada because they've been watching the media, and they believe that unless they see a polar bear now, they might not ever see a polar bear in their lifetime, and it's hard to actually get on a polar bear viewing trip now in Canada. But the customers who are coming on the tours are very interested in climate change. That's what they want to talk about, that's what they want to hear about, that's what they want to know about. Just several years ago, they were much more interested in the polar bear than they were in climate change. But that's changed almost overnight.
We have a challenge whether we think we should say to people, come and visit the barrier reef before it's gone, better bring forward tourism. But all messages have two edges, sides to that sword. Look, we're halfway through our time, and I'm conscious I want to throw it at the room now. I'm going to break it up into, say, 15 minutes of some really good, quick answers or quick interventions, and then spend 10 or 15 minutes at the back end on the scenario of maybe what we can do together. So to start with, so we have a room full of people. We won't have a 10-minute introduction where everybody is, but a quick name and country name and sector would be great. I mentioned, Rob, I was going to throw to you, so quick warning, just while everyone's getting ready with their questions. Really quick snapshot of what you've taken one single destination in the tropical north of Queensland and tried to bring all the operators together to sell one message to your customers. What sort of sign-on have you had?
We've had over 40 operators participate actively. We developed the Planet Safe Partnership Program. Our motivation was we host 2.5 million people, and we're hosting them into the most pristine World Heritage areas, the Great Barrier Reef and the Daintree Rainforest. And the issues we spoke about this morning, so those were the issues that motivated us. And we developed a program that wasn't complicated for our industry, because I think that was the other issue we were very conscious of. A lot of them were already best practice. And what we did is brought a lot of things together, components together. Initially, we actually encouraged everyone to undertake an audit, professional audit of what their carbon footprint was. So they started the process and benchmarked that. We also identified that a lot of them were accredited, from Green Globe to other very highly accredited and I suppose fully endorsed accreditation schemes. So we incorporated that within the process of bringing these people together. And of course, thirdly, we made sure that we established processes locally in place that allowed them, for their carbon offsetting, to contribute locally. We have parts of it buying back some of the forest. We actually have also endangered species nurseries that we've established, and we also have scientific work that we're actually funding.
And now you're collectively marketing to the world that you can come to North Queensland and tread lightly on the environment to take away some people's fear of and be able to put back.
Exactly, allowing us now to engage with the travel section, the frontline section, to provide them a bit of a, I suppose, a credible program which they can use to actually offset concerns that the client might have. So it's a destinational process of bringing all those components together, but also recognising, I think, Chris, very importantly, like we've realised today, that so many people are doing so many things already. What we realised back in tropical North Queensland is that there were so many industry operators already functioning at the best level of world practice with regards. We live it, we love it, and we want to share it. So that's our asset. So we really do have to protect it.
And Rob runs a group that's both destination marketing and membership driven. Randy, Michelle spoke about in Canada as a membership organisation running the Canadian Tourism Industry Association. Is it hard? Was it easy to get the private sector to come together were you pushing the government, or have you responding to what the government agencies have been doing, and how do you keep a membership base together on something as often complex and often in conflict with each other as climate change?
Yeah, in conflict with each other is a good comment as well. Our industry, I think, like somebody said this morning in one of the panels, or one of the comments, was the last year and a half, this whole environmental, sustainable, responsible, whatever name you want to put on it, has really risen to the top of everybody's agenda. And I think that's helped us, obviously, to move this file. Our organization has been involved in sustainable tourism initiatives since 1992, and certainly in 2001 when we signed on an accord with Parks Canada. But the last year and a half, 2 years, it's really risen to the top of everybody's awareness level, which has really helped. Our government hasn't got the best record in this regard. There's a few people within government, certainly the tourism minister has the environmental agenda high on her personal agenda, which is great. So that might help in the next year or two. I just want to throw something in that I think I'd want to make sure was recorded somewhere. In moving our industry, we're made up of, and I think it's the same everywhere in the world, mostly small to medium-sized businesses, whether it's 80% or 90% or 95% are really small business operators. And everyone in this room, I don't know if there are any small business operators actually here, but it'd be good to hear from them. You know, they're only going to be motivated, I think, by three things. One, obviously, regulation. We heard a little bit about that this morning. We need governments to help us inspire and move industry, especially the small and medium-sized businesses. And it's tough for me to say that in our own country because they don't want to be regulated. But I think to move them quickly, we've got to look at how governments and private sector work together in regulating properly and in the correct way. Obviously, they're going to be moved by ROI, and we heard that this morning. They need to see a return on investment, otherwise they're not going to be inspired to move. And thirdly, consumer demand or the competitive marketplace, lump them together. Unless consumers start to move this more quickly, or the competitive marketplace in response to consumer demand moves, then we're not going to be able to move our industry. And we have to be conscious of the fact that this world is dominated by small and medium-sized enterprises, and that we need governments and ROI and consumer demand to be motivations for change here.
Chris, can I just comment on that? Because I think from an industry association point of view in Australia, we need to be aware that relying on government to solve these issues isn't going to solve the issue. Governments have been trying to solve social issues for millennia and have invariably never managed to finally resolve them. Taxation, regulation is a dead weight on the economy. Most small, medium-sized businesses are strapped for cash. Any government deadweight activity that puts the weights up for small business is going to in fact take away from small business that capacity, that spare financial capacity that they might have to be able to innovate their way out of it. Now it has to be very, very carefully worked through. And when governments get their hands on taxation, revenue sources and on regulation bureaucracies, small business suffers. And we need to be very, very careful about how quickly we call government to regulate this industry. The reason we've survived these many downturns over a long period of time is that we are, as a small business, small, medium-sized business sector, very resilient, and we need to maintain that.
Question from the floor, then, Sanjay first, then
Yeah, just to respond to that, what I totally agree with him, that any sort of regulation, any sort of control would not be in the right context. Maybe the government can sensitize them, maybe talk to them, maybe hold seminar, maybe holding an awareness campaign. But once you start regulating a trade, it may not be the right approach, especially when we all are opening out. A very quick fix.
Brenton, and then
Yes, just to add, also in Sri Lanka, we have the SME sector is very large. And we found that the best way to motivate them is to give them value. And we have taken on two initiatives which we are launching. One is to have a web initiative to market the SMEs through a payment gateway and all of that, because that is expensive for each of them to have their own. So we are looking at us, driving an initiative like that, through which we will be also providing the messages that we are talking about here. The second is education and training. It's a creation of awareness and training. Training is valued very much by SMEs. And we find that when we train them, we can hook them once again and include some of these again, the messages that we want to take on into the training. Without in a sort of not a direct way, not to sort of shove it down their throats, but to what you call suasion, moral suasion, I think is the best way of doing that, and those people find to be of great value.
down the back. That's right.
My observations are basically coming from the point of view of South Asian countries as such. Whereas the industry is responsible for creating certain problems in the environment, and it has a very positive role to play, and it must be a responsible role to play. While not advocating any regulatory role of the governments, but in South Asian countries, what is happening is that tourism, barring the exception of Sri Lanka, has hardly any role to play in the environmental functions. Tourism is accused of its contribution towards it, but because politically tourism is not important in South Asian countries, it is never consulted. Therefore, it's very important that the governments, the national governments, must give importance to tourism, not merely for earning foreign exchange and arrivals, but for its role in the environment. And what really needed is the WTO and PATA to get together to bring it a political, somebody could convey to Mr. Lipman and to Mr. De Jong.
He's right there, he's listening to you.
Oh, he's here. Hide your head in shame. They must convince the governments that tourism should be brought at a higher level to be involved in it. In our part of the world,
as a lobbyist not from South Asia, it's a global problem. So you don't have to feel bad, it's only South Asia where tourism doesn't rate high enough in
okay, but we have a much greater problem than that.
Yes.
Our government wants to regulate, but let's say we accuse the airlines. If you don't build airports,
correct.
why accuse the airlines?
Well, let's
When
give
you don't
Jeffrey the
create
right of
jobs-
reply, and then we're down the front. Jeffrey?
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much, Inda.
If you were here, I wouldn't have mentioned you.
Would have gone harder.
I had the opportunity, thanks to PATA, to say something on behalf of WTO tomorrow. So if you will permit me just to make a couple of comments on a personal basis, as someone who's been sitting listening to these kind of discussions for nearly 40 years in one or another public or private role. I believe that at the end of the day, the big framework is going to be set by governments because they're the only people who can set it. This is a global problem. And this is not going to be decided in WTO, PATA, here or anywhere, as my friend from India will tell you. It's going to be decided with very careful sovereign negotiations inside the UNFCCC and in other fora. That will set a framework, and that will be government. It won't be the private sector. There is an immense possibility for the private sector, increasingly in partnership with governments, at a national level and at a local level, to find the kind of solutions we've been listening to this morning. And I believe, personally, we will solve this issue by doing that. And the last point I want to make, I want to again reiterate what our colleague from India said. We tend to look at these things and we see the climate scientists talking about 50 years and the end of the century, and then we sit down and we say, okay, what are we going to do tomorrow to fix this problem? It won't be fixed tomorrow. It will be fixed over a period of time. And I think our challenge is to be able to position ourselves where that big fix is going to be, whether it's government or private sector or mix, and to be at the head of the pack. Not ahead, not behind, but to be where we haven't been on the green movement through the 90s, when we were pretending to be at the head of the pack, playing the game between Green Globe and Green Leaf and all that sort of stuff. We have a real chance now.
I think you said governments legislate, industry innovates, and it's the role for us to innovate. Though in terms of the long-term solution, in our country, the great economic but even worse moral dilemma, in my lifetime, my children's lifetime, the barrier reef could die. It's that dramatic. It will certainly lose colour. It will be bleached by a range of climate-induced issues, man-made problems that we are causing that happen. So it's certainly focusing our mind significantly.
Don't worry, Chris, because there'll be another one in Dubai.
Yes, they are. Jeffrey and I were there last week, and you think you're joking. That's probably very likely to happen. Wally, and then down the front.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, isn't the challenge who takes the leadership? I mean, isn't that a part of the big problem with the private sector, that when they see government get involved, there is a fear that they're leading from a position where they don't understand the practical realities that the industry face.
Yep.
And in reality, you actually need both working together. I mean, you actually need a whole of government approach. But the tourism industry, unless it is able to demonstrate a level of leadership, it's very hard for the government to get behind that. And in our own country, what we found is when government and industry began to partner, began to understand the pressure points from each other,
So
they were able to collectively map out a way forward. And that's what's empowering. And if you go back to the question about small operators, I mean, we're no different to everyone else. But our small operators think that the role of the national marketing body is to bring people into the country. That's what they see as our job. We then educate them and give them market intelligence in terms of what customers are looking for. And so they don't see themselves as marketers, they see themselves as delivering against the promise that the marketing bodies go out and do. And I think our tourism board's been a wee bit different to many others, is that historically tourism boards never got involved with destination marketing. It was safe just to be a marketer. Over the last 6-7 years, we've become heavily involved with destination management. And that's about upskilling our industry to make these practices good business practices, to make sure they understand what the market intelligence are telling us and what visitor expectations are. And about getting in behind a whole of government, a whole of industry approach. And if you take that from a macro view, isn't that what the tourism industry here is really asking itself?
Concept of partnership is perfect, but take that further. No matter what you do in New Zealand, if they're doing something different in Denmark, it won't matter. It's the first truly global partnership with climate change, because the world's only as strong as its weakest link that leaves it out as well.
But could I just add two very quick points? One is that tourism only contributes that much of the carbon footprint. And so, to a certain degree, that's what we should be focusing on, just our industry and what we
Getting that much of the
contribute.
attention, though.
That's what we have to change. But I mean, that's the reality. We did some research and we found that if you took what one visitor spent and you then applied it into a farming sense, you would need X number of cows, you'd need X number of tons of fruit, and when you looked at the carbon footprint for that, actually we're doing our country a service by actually getting visitors in because the carbon footprint is actually less that way.
It's all the damage your dairy cows are doing. Just question down the front, then we're going to try to create a scenario.
Bob Guy is my name. I'm with Pacific World. We're a medium-sized business that's been purchased by an enormous business. We're the destination management company business. So we own vehicles, hire guides, deliver tours, that kind of thing. We have a couple of challenges to deal with. We have a love, hate frustration feeling with government. Most of you folks on the stage here are dealing with the promotion of tourism. We're regulated by some of you. In fact, I have 2 regulators in the room with me who issue licenses.
Careful.
In 8 of the countries where we operate. But they don't issue licenses for the vehicles that we operate. And sometimes it takes years to secure a license. In one of the countries where we operate, we can't even buy a Euro 4 vehicle because it's not written into the law. So there has to be some harmonization of the laws so that we can actually move forward with the environment. Some of the laws go back to the British Empire and the hackney and omnibus days. And we still have horse and carriage in some of the laws. So we need your help in dealing with your counterparts in the transport ministry, in the Ministry for Vehicle Imports. We have several countries in the region where we operate where international vehicles cannot be imported. And so we're dealing with local manufacturers, and we are now owned by a corporation that is headquartered in the United Kingdom. Therefore, we have to live with EC regulations. So when we talk about 100% seat belts, people say, what? You want to put seat belts in these vans? Whoa, we've never done that. So, you know, we're dealing with the transport ministry and saying, by the way, we've got to have seat belts in these vans.
And to standardise across jurisdictions, I think it's a very important point.
And we need the help from these guys dealing with their counterparts down the line. The other thing is we operate in lots of islands with wonderful swaying palm trees and beaches and all of that. There we have very little infrastructure for recycling. Very little infrastructure. And sometimes we have to go and create it to deliver it. You know, I was making a point yesterday. We do exhibitions and buy tons of carpeting. And carpeting is typically used in an exhibition once and then resold or thrown away, wherever away is. And we need to have some capabilities in third world developing countries to absorb recycling of plastic, of bottles, of all the things that go along with this. So, you know, there's a long way before us in these places.
Perfect segue for me. Hopefully some of the questions, people got their hands up and milled into this last session, so we've got, Oliver will kill me if not a long time. One thing we've been asked to go away with is a collaborative approach. What can we do? And one good idea. One concept we're knocking around in recent times is the impact of long-haul aviation taxes. If anybody hasn't noticed, the UK government's about to change their new tax out of London to now apply tax against, the further you fly, the bigger the tax is going to be. The downside of that is the aerial highway that links the developed northern world to the less developed Indian and Pacific Ocean communities. They're the countries that are probably facing rising sea levels more than most. They're the ones who have the climatic impact of climate change on them more than most. What I'm wondering is how we as a Pacific Asia community, and some will call it opportunistic from a country like Australia, we're long haul, but whether there's a community we can get to under WTO talking about poverty alleviation. If we leave those northern countries to whack big taxes on long haul aviation, we can forget about the impact of actual climate on small nations because we'll kill them with regulation and consumerism beforehand. Yeah. I'm just wondering between some people in the room who are representing some of the smaller nations in Indian and Pacific Ocean and even some from the source markets who have governments who are thinking about those taxes, where do we go and how do we collectively get together to maybe take on that challenge? Do you want to kick off?
My name is Sheikh Jamaluddin. I'm the CEO of the Brunei Tourism Board. I'd like to share with you how we as a government are addressing the issue of global warming, you see. Brunei, Malaysia, and Indonesia, we have together joined hand and signed an agreement, not an MOU. Our ministers responsible for our rainforest and tourism have come together and signed an agreement to preserve and protect an area of 220,000 square kilometers. Can you visualize that size? That is the central of Borneo. And that takes about 56% of our country in Brunei. So this is one step which I believe is one of the best practices, similar to the Sri Lanka Earth Lump project. So this is something which I don't want you to leave this room thinking that the government could not, So we've done it, and we are, and His Majesty the Sultan of Brunei only last week has approved to set up the Heart of Borneo Center in Brunei, and we're now looking for a CEO to manage it. So thank you.
Right.
I'd like to just, my name is Reed Ridgway, and I manage a small business, or a humanitarian mission called the Ecotourism Training Center. One of the things that I've noticed is that the travel industry spends a lot of time surveying customers' reaction, surveying the market, deciding whether people are making consumer choices that would indicate they care about global warming. And I would like to encourage all the people in the travel industry to take a different, less reactionary approach and use the media as an instrument to educate the consumer, to move that forward, because I think we're all in a situation collectively that the travel industry is going to be deeply affected by the failure of addressing these issues. Why don't, instead of reacting to it and waiting for consumers to make that choice, why don't we use the media and our own instruments of media to move the consumer mindset forward so that we can actually make a bigger difference right away?
Michelle, do you want to tackle
Well,
that?
it's a little bit of the challenge I posed earlier, is that we are spending a lot of money doing the same research, getting the same result, and not taking that one step further. So I think that is a good idea of how to turn that around and focus it more on moving the consumer forward. Because as much as we can sit in the room this morning and say, this is all great and we're going to do these things, and by 2011 or 2010, we're going to have our own initiatives offset or whatever. The customer at large is not seeing that there's not a positive glow shining back on the tourism sector, and so I think anything we can do collectively to educate the consumer would be very worthwhile.
David, you run the international group looking at student travel and education travel. Probably up there with convention travellers as the most susceptible to green travel intention. Are you seeing in that community, that consumer community, what we fear will happen and research show isn't happening yet? Is it going to happen first at Gen Y travellers that largely you're, and or Gen Y workers, as to another issue, how we're going to find staff, those who work in green companies, but are you seeing it in the Gen Y travel market?
Yeah, we certainly hope so, and we're acting as if they are both the most interested and concerned about social issues and the most receptive to information and mitigation strategies that we're putting out. I mean, we're very much at the same time interested, though, in collaborating with organizations to do, as was said, which is to try to find some way to rewrite. In my view, the objective is that we have to rewrite our social contract with society and with government to show the value of our industry. So we're very much leading our information strategy with the message that it's important to travel. Now, we can do that a little bit because they only have a chance to do this as a young traveler.
Yeah.
And so we're actually, we're leading with a guide. I left some outside. Peter asked me to bring some sitting out there with a guide to our industry, because our industry does touch consumers in 10 million times. Our membership was...
And if destinations coming to you and saying, how can we address that? Are you able, as destination managers here, can they work with your or others to talk about getting the mindset of that consumer?
That's right. And so what we do is we do put pressure. We do put pressure that people want to attract the youth and student travel market internationally, that they have to position themselves in a certain way. And these kind of concerns are very much part of that. So I was in Sri Lanka recently, and we had meetings there with Dilipa and with Renton, and we were we very much believe that that's the kind of market that our young people will attract. And we're also, the other thing we're doing is we're putting it in the context of a responsible travel message, which is something we've been pushing for some time, because we also are very concerned about that. This doesn't eclipse the
Social
work that was done on
environment.
sustainability previously. But I was very pleased today to hear that people are doing that everywhere, and so I actually think that that's not so big an issue any longer. I think the context is a good one, but I do think we have to combine and send a message out there that the world can't survive without travel.
Yeah.
And fundamentally,
Boring place without it, wouldn't it?
Reposition and reorient our positioning with society and with government and everything, and that's where I think the best common front of this industry can be created.
We survived terrorism, we now have to survive change. Sanjay, and then down the front.
Yeah, in fact, Peter is also here. There's a small suggestion. We are all concerned about education awareness. Whatever has been deliberated for 2 hours in the morning session can be reduced in a 10-minute CD and can be circulated as success stories all over the world. It will be a great thing because it doesn't paint a dismal picture. It's a very, very encouraging thing, but it has to be very, very properly edited. And if it's circulated all over the world, the point which was raised about the medium and the small travel agents, stakeholders can be taken care of.
Just a very quick comment. I think we also need to recognize and respect the fact that everyone, public sector, private sector, right across the world, we're all going through the learning curve right now. And we need to recognize that government is needing to learn as much about climate change and what to do with it as much as we are in the private sector. And that's the basis of my business, so thank God, because otherwise I wouldn't be employed. And it's a situation where it's message versus messenger strategy. Thank God for Al Gore, because he provided a messenger to get us talking about this. He's created a very sexy campaign out of an important issue, like Bono did with poverty alleviation. We now have to engage people at both government and private individual level to participate, and then marry that to a framework like the UNWTO has developed to be able to put the plans in place at both private and public sector to allow people's participation to have the end result. But it's allowing ourselves to go through that process together, because neither side has the solution, but collectively, as long as we have a common understanding, and then to Wally's point and Michelle's and Renton's, creating that as part of our competitive edge as a destination, part of the image, we'll get to a sustainable solution and not tactical objectives that are disconnected at a
Well, luckily we have both Bono and Al Gore in the room, so I might, coming back towards an end, to Peter and to Jeffrey, I posed the question of this long-haul alliance, and I don't know who's Bono and who's Al Gore, but you can take your chances on either. How do we work with, a final question, how do we work with organisations to facilitate this? You're on the two biggest groups we're going to work with here. Just maybe framed in the concept of that issue about long-haul aviation. How do we work with PATA and UNWTO to go to Gordon Brown, to go to the EU, to go to George Bush and talk about don't kill our neighbours economically in the Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean before climate, don't beat them to the punch on climate. How do we work with you guys to take the messages here to both educate destinations and solve problems? You can go first, Bono.
I noticed how good you are at passing the leadership on this issue.
You still have
Jeffrey.
I was going to respond to your point on taxation, because I noticed that nobody else.
Yes, thank you, Jeffrey.
Nobody else had responded to it. I think we have to deal with this the way that hedgehogs have sex.
This would be good.
Very, very carefully.
Yes. Just enjoy the ride.
Government's tax for a variety of reasons all over the place. And the only way that I've seen industry to be able to deal with that on a specific case like the UK is for people to go and, like the farmers, you take cows and you put them on the steps of the Parliament. Well, we don't operate that way in tourism. I don't think we're going to be able to.
The people at Kiribati on the steps of saying don't.
That sort of thing, and it's a reality. We're not that kind of a sector. But I do think there are many arguments that need to be made now to help protect the long-haul air travel, to help protect particularly the air travel to the poorest countries. We've been saying endlessly that this is the economic lifeline. The issue isn't climate change. At the highest levels, it's climate change and poverty. Tourism's a great vehicle for helping to deal with poverty. It's not the only vehicle, but it's a great vehicle. And for most of those poor countries, you can only get there by air. So I think however we make the argument, we've got to be sophisticated enough to ring fence the poor long-haul destinations, the emerging markets, the growing markets. They've got to be ring fenced. The problem's been created by the developed nations. Everybody knows this. Most of the pollution is coming from there. Most of the air transport is within them or between them. So I think our argument has got to be sophisticated at that level. At a second level, and funny enough, back in 1993, when I was with WTTC, we got a young academic called Nick Stern, as he then was, to do a study on taxation. One of the issues, he said, where we had failed as a sector, as an industry, was we allowed ourselves to be taxed discriminately and then have the funds stuck into the general budget. We never insisted that if you tax us discriminately, we don't like that, but if you're going to do it, force yourself to hypothecate. I think on climate change, there is a chance that we take a stand on this issue.
Which wasn't what happened in London so far.
It's not been done anywhere, but the reality is that you can say to the government, okay, you're taxing us to solve what you say is our problem, use those funds for our purposes. Yep. Don't dump them in the general public. And I think, just because Peter wasn't going to have anything to add to this, by the way, I'd like to say, just because we would be very happy to work with Pata on this issue in a collaborative.
Because this is a part of the world, it's a member part of the world that.
The two parties are willing for a marriage. All is needed is the priest to solve a
perfect partnership.
And the prenuptials, and the prenuptials.
Peter, it would be ironic, wouldn't it, if Northern Europe thought they'd try and save the island nations, the Pacific and Indian Ocean, yet in doing so they tax them into non-existence anyway, or their customers from arriving.
Yeah, I mean, let me take a slightly different approach to the same issue. I think we have to stop lamenting the fragmentation of our industry, which we have for too long. You know, has become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Here's an opportunity, and Jeffrey and I talked about this last night, which is of such paramount, universal, intersectoral, cross-sectoral importance, called climate change, that it forces the minds, it forces the money, it forces governments and industry to work together, and it is a unique opportunity for our industry to finally make a fist and become that lobby for an industry that claims its size is enormous.